To me, my X-Men, and I'll tell you a tale of weirdness with a lot of pieces still missing months after the fact. Okay. So I've been waiting to talk about this for a while. The whole thing with the writer and original showrunner of X-Men 97 being fired, it not being clear why, the likelihood and the rumors and inside sourcing for why, and all the back and forth between him and Disney / Marvel. I have been waiting for a while now for someone to show their hand fully. Because it feels like they're both trying to call the other's bluff, but neither is fully committing. And it's starting to make me wonder, are they both bluffing, at least to a certain degree? So we're going to talk about Beau DeMayo, the controversies that have gone on between him and Marvel / Disney, where things currently stand, and why they stand in such a weird place. Because I've talked about this kind of thing a fair bit. It's been a little while since I've talked about somebody like Beau DeMayo or someone on the creative or performance side or whatever getting in a clash with the studio. It's been a little bit, but I've talked about it with folks like Ezra Miller, like Gina Carano, James Gunn. I address this intermittently. And part of what's usually interesting for me to talk about this is I'm usually able to parse really easily at least one half of what happened, which is at this point I've gotten pretty good at analyzing and being able to translate what the corporate side of it is, why they're doing what they do, because especially in online discourse, you see a lot of speculation about why a corporation like Disney or Warner Brothers or what have you is behaving the way that they are, and they seem to assign motives to it like it's a person, failing to remember that it's a corporation, and it's usually way easier to track in getting into conspiratorial thought around motives and the real reason, like that's almost never true. So that's usually how this goes. I'll talk about what happened, what corporate did, why they did what they did, whether you agree with it or not. Here, the way that both sides are behaving is just odd. And I am going to give a recap because I feel like I kind of have to. Because even if you've caught bits and pieces of this over the last 6 months or so, like it's weird. It's just weird. And like I said, I was kind of waiting for the big reveal, for one of the two sides who have basically kind of been threatening to release all the details of what it was that happened to actually freaking say something, but they haven't. And this has been eating at my brain enough that I need to expunge it and get it out there. Now, if either side, be it Marvel or DeMayo, actually show their hand, I'll probably do a follow-up. But right now, I just got to talk about the fact that they're dancing around each other this much, because that in and of itself is odd and weird. And also, if I covered the timeline up to this point, that'll save me the trouble of having to do it later if and when somebody does actually show their hand on this. So, what was it that went down? Well, all of this is in relation to the, at this point, very successful first season of X-Men 97. Now, Beau DeMayo was the executive producer and head writer of that. He wrote or co-wrote 7 out of 10 of the episodes of that first season. And he was hired. He got the chance to pitch his take on reviving the X-Men animated series based off having worked on Moon Knight. That was basically his foot in the door with Marvel. At some point, he also took a crack at the script for the much beleaguered Blade movie, which who even knows what's going on with that thing at this point. Like, tiny side note, at this point, I would not be shocked, given how well the response was to Wesley Snipes returning as Blade in Deadpool and Wolverine, if they can't pull together the Blade movie with Mahershala Ali by the end of the year to have it start filming, they might just bring Wesley Snipes back instead. I would not be surprised. Anyway, moving away from that. So, the show premiered, but before that, just a matter of weeks, it was announced that DeMayo was fired and would not be returning for later seasons past the work he'd already done. At the time that this had happened, he had turned in all of his work for season 1 and season 2 and had begun working on season 3. Now, it was interesting to note at the time that the wording was fired, not left the project, not moved on to other things, not had a conflict, and like fired. And just that word is already kind of a, whoa, that's kind of harsh phrasing. But nobody was saying at the time. He really made no comment about why it had happened or even like alleging as to why. And Disney/Marvel, they just said, nope, he is no longer involved with this and left it at that. Now, what was even more odd is that as the show aired and was very good, which was kind of a relief, like the showrunner getting fired just a few weeks before, that didn't bode well for the quality of the show, but the show turned out to be great. And so as it's airing, he's putting stuff, on Twitter, talking about the process, the thoughts, and, some little Easter eggy stuff that was in there, which was kind of neat and also seemed a little odd, but like, okay, this was reading at this point, regardless of whatever went down for the reason that he was fired, both he and Marvel seemed to be behaving more or less amicably. He was hyping up the show. He was enjoying the praise of fans, and Disney was getting decent press off it. And people weren't really asking all that much. Like, some people were still like, okay, but if this is so good, why'd you fire him? But neither side seemed to really be willing to answer that question. So people, for the most part, seemed to be willing to move on from it. Now, in July, DeMayo's replacement for season 3 was announced. That is Matthew Chauncey, who was the showrunner for What If? And that announcement was that he was going to showrun the 3rd season. So general indications seem to be they were going to be using DeMayo's script for season 2, which makes sense. If they were already in and done, it's going to allow for a smoother production to not be changing those scripts and to just move forward with them as they have them. So again, the whole thing seems kind of weirdly amicable. So it's like, oh, okay. It's like two people suddenly getting divorced, but also not really like bad-mouthing or attacking each other. You're like, oh, okay, I guess things are cool. And they stayed that way for about another month. In August, DeMayo did this very odd thing where he kind of passive-aggressively kind of complained about not having been reached out to by Marvel to be attending the Emmys ceremony, which a bunch of the crew of X-Men 97 were going to be at because it was nominated for Outstanding Animated Program. But that also struck me as weird. Like, I get it. It was his idea. It was his pitch. He did most of the writing. It was his baby. He deserves a lot of credit for how good that show came out. But, like, dude, you don't work there anymore. On a personal level, I get that it's real frustrating that something you shepherded and have a lot of investment in and a lot of pride in, you are being cut out of the accolades for. I get that frustration on a personal level, but, like, just practically, you don't work there, dude. I mean, like, if you get fired from a company, you don't get an invite to the Christmas party. That was a weird thing. The first of several weird things. Because just 2 days after that, DeMayo claimed that his credit for season 2 was being removed. Now, this went down on Twitter, and his claim for why this happened is, again, this whole thing's weird. I got to stop using the word weird. It's getting overused. I'm going to devalue the word. His claim is that because of a very gay coded piece of fan art that he received and shared and posted on his Instagram on June 4th for Pride Month, that 9 days later, he received a letter from Disney informing him that his credit was going to be stripped from him due to that post. Now, here we hit the first thing that I'm like, wait a minute, which is that he claims to have received an actual letter from Disney and says what he claims is the substance of it, but also, so far as I could find, has not ever shared, an image of this letter. I have to assume the letter was sent digitally, even though, normally a letter is physical. But whether it was physical or not, a scan, a screen grab, something of it. Because, like, you're saying what it was, but you're not going to show it to us? Because that seems odd. Complicated by the fact that only a few hours after he did that, Marvel put out a statement to both Variety and The Hollywood Reporter stating that, quote, Mr. DeMeo was terminated in March 2024 following an internal investigation. Given the egregious nature of the findings, we severed ties with him immediately, and he has no further affiliation with Marvel. Now, this is interesting because strictly, this isn't really a response to what DeMeo was claiming at the time, because what DeMeo had claimed just a few hours before, and this appeared to kind of be a response to, was that his credit was being stripped for a social media post. But then Marvel fires back with, yeah, you were fired because you did real bad stuff. And this is what I mean by, like, both sides are acting weird and it almost feels like they're both bluffing. Because Disney's reply back fails entirely to address what the initial issue he was bringing up was. So instead, they go back to his original firing, which was not what he talked about, but is something that they are claiming they have dirt on. But again, you might have noticed it just says egregious conduct. It doesn't say what that conduct is or even the general nature of that conduct. They haven't said, only that it was the result of an internal investigation. Now, inside sources for both Variety and The Hollywood Reporter are indicating two things. This is not official from Disney. That is important to note, that that what I'm about to say is not something that Disney or Marvel itself has said directly. But inside sources for both Variety and The Hollywood Reporter are indicating that, one, the egregious conduct was sexual misconduct. There are a few specifics floating out there. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that, partly for a reason I'll address in a little bit. And that the reason for his credit being stripped is that he had violated his termination agreement and the associated NDA with his social media postings, which kind of addresses what DeMeo was saying, because if the claim, and again, this is not direct from Marvel, but if it is accurate that the stripping of his credit had to do with violations of the termination agreement, it is possible that that original Instagram post was a factor or maybe one of several instances of violating the termination agreement. So maybe there's a little truth in both aspects there. Again, except only one of them is actually said officially and the other has been dancing around it. Now, I said I wasn't going to get too much into the weeds on the specifics of the allegations, and that is partly because of a name that kept popping up when I was looking for more specifics. Now, as I said, Variety and The Hollywood Reporter are just citing inside sources. That's a pretty standard, normal thing to do when you have sources that you don't want to name, don't want to expose, because they'll get blacklisted, they might get fired, they won't talk to you anymore, but who still have knowledge of it. That's the kind of thing that you would expect a well-established outlet like Variety or The Hollywood Reporter to have. They would have inside sources at Disney or Marvel that could give them a little more information than the official statement. So that in of itself is not really the problem. The problem is when you start looking at anyone who has gotten more specific, where you start seeing allegations about sending inappropriate pictures, just the general idea that DeMeo was somehow a quote-unquote nightmare to work with. When you get into those kinds of specifics, most of that seems to track back to a guy by the name of Jeff Snider. And Jeff Snider... Oh, all right. How do I want to put this? Jeff Snider used to be a standard journalist. He actually worked at Variety before getting laid off, possibly fired. He was laid off he's worked there twice. One of those times he was laid off. The second time, I don't know if he was laid off or fired, but he's been independent for a while. And so what he's been doing for a while is being, that insider who no longer has that editorial mandate and can just, say what he thinks. But, editorial mandate exists for a reason. While it is true that sometimes editors will end up deliberately or not squashing a story because they don't feel there's enough support for it, even if it is a story that maybe should be put out there regardless. An independent person like Jeff Snider now can just say that stuff. But of course, that also means it's a lot less vetted and a lot less reliable. I'm not going to go so far as to say that Jeff Snider is a guy who just slings BS left and right, but you need to realize that the metric by which he's now being judged, since he is no longer part of a larger organization with more editorial standards and whatnot that, again, they don't always live up to, but they do at least have. He's now being compared to, say, Grace Randolph, and he's certainly better than her, at least in terms of his track record for having his inside scoops actually turn out to be correct. However, he throws a lot of stuff out there, and he loves to jump on salacious stuff. And I'm not going to go so far as to say that if he's the one saying it, that I don't believe it, but I am going to say that if he's the only one giving specifics, I don't want to cite him as a source. And I wasn't going to bring this up at all, except I know that somewhere in the comments people will be bringing out, oh, what about the fact that he, did this or did that? And again, most, if not all of those things, when I could find them, all trace back to this one guy that I don't feel comfortable citing for something like this. If you think that he's trustworthy and is somebody who should be cited and respected, cool, good for you. I'd rather just not, please. Okay, so getting off of that topic, DeMeo has hired a lawyer by the name of Brian Fredman, who actually specializes in Hollywood wrongful termination lawsuits. He's gone up against Disney before. And Fredman is one of those lawyers who likes to put out statements in the press, and has done so here, although interestingly, not really addressing any of the initial reasons for the firing, which again, Disney has not officially said what those are, but like his things that he's calling out all have to do with the silencing tactics and the termination agreement and the NDA, and not so much about the initial firing. Specifically, on September 4th, Fredman filed in Los Angeles Superior Court over an illegal non-disparagement provision. Now, the actual wording of the NDA that is being brought up has actually been provided to some outlets, so I can give some of my thoughts on this. Now, keep in mind, I am not a lawyer, but I am going to give my view based off as I understand it. Now, NDAs in general are messy. That came up in my videos when I talked about Neil Gaiman. But these are corporate NDAs, which are a little bit of a different beast. And they also vary from area to area. Now, in California specifically, where obviously all of this is going down, there can be non-disparagement clauses in NDAs, but they have to be worded really narrowly, because what is not allowed in California is for non-disparagement to cover any potential illegal, unlawful, or harassment style things. In other words, you can't put in an NDA, termination agreement, or non-disparagement document that someone is not allowed to say that this unlawful thing or this criminal thing or this issue of harassment happened to me. You're not allowed to block somebody from saying that. Now, it is worth mentioning, the wording on the document that we have from Disney does not say that. However, it is overly broad because it has this whole thing of making no statements that would harm the reputation of Marvel or the series. And that is also not allowed. Now, that does not specifically say you can't cite any issues of, things being unlawful harassment or whatever, like I mentioned before, but it is so broad that it would encompass not being allowed to say that. That is also not allowed in California. You cannot word a non-disparagement clause so broadly that it would cover the kinds of things you are not allowed to say they can't talk about. So because this non-disparagement clause was not appropriately narrow, that appears to be, at least right now, the primary thing that Fredman is going after. And again, from my non-lawyer being person, from my lay perspective over here, I think he's probably got a pretty good case on that specific issue, which is probably why it's what he's hammering on right now. And as I said, avoiding the questions of why was he fired in the first place? Now, the same day that suit was filed, DeMeo put up a half-hour video on his OnlyFans, which he teased as being the truth. So, the OnlyFans. All right, couple of things about this. The first is, DeMeo did have an OnlyFans previously, but it was deleted. It appeared to be deleted along with his Instagram initially upon his firing. Now, both those started up again. The OnlyFans specifically started up again on September 4th, which is when the lawsuit was filed and when he made an announcement, hey, you want to hear my real thoughts? Here it is. So there was a lot of speculation early on from some people who, this wasn't something that I really saw in the press other than Friggin' Jeff Snider bringing it up mostly to say, no, he wasn't fired because he had an OnlyFans. He was fired because he was a nightmare to work with. And again, I'm not dealing with that guy. But DeMeo apparently had an OnlyFans previously. So far as I'm aware, a non-explicit OnlyFans. Again, I can't confirm that. The original version of it is gone. It was restarted on the 4th. And yes, in the interest of fairness and due diligence, I did sign up for that to see what it's like. And honestly, I don't want to go so far as to call it a grift, but I find it a little sus to basically hide your statement and thoughts on the legal matter that you are bringing against one of the largest corporations in the world behind a paywall of $9.99. Hey folks, it's Vera from The Edit. I'm going to be jumping in at a few points, because since I originally completed this, Bo DeMeo actually did a live on his OnlyFans, which I did catch. Now, I didn't screen grab it or record it or anything like that, but I did listen in and even got to ask a few of my own questions. And I will say here that he did bring up the idea of why he's talking about this stuff on OnlyFans. And he made an interesting point that I hadn't thought of, which is that by putting it behind a paywall, he is far less likely to get harassed. Now, existing as a trans person on the internet, I know a little bit about harassment. And when you put something out on Instagram or Twitter or something that is publicly viewable, it is very easy for the people who hate you to not only find you, but to send everyone else they know who hates you after you. Most people who do that aren't willing to pay $9.99 a pop to be able to harass you. So while I'm still not really comfortable saying I think OnlyFans was the appropriate venue, I do at least now have a much better understanding of why he did it, and I'm far less likely to call it a grift at this point. Although I don't doubt he saw a pretty penny from it, if we're being honest. And if he's properly internet savvy at all, he also knew that outlets were going to watch the thing and then report on what he said anyway. So it was still going to get out in the general public without him needing to actually put himself in the firing line. One could make a case that it's actually kind of a savvy way to go about things. I'm not sure I'm going to make that case, but somebody could. As for the other stuff on there, like, it's non-explicit. It's teasing, sure. It's Instagram friendly. Pretty much everything he has up there, he could have put up on Instagram. Now look, I'm not going to judge him for having an OnlyFans. I can't. I have an OnlyFans. Heck, I have an OnlyFans that charges more than his. Granted, there's a heck of a lot more on mine than there is his, but we won't get into all of that. Now, I'm not going to pull any clips from the video that's on OnlyFans because that seems kind of disrespectful to me just on its face, but I do kind of have to talk about what's in there. And it's both simultaneously specific and vague. He brings up things like the idea that his identity as a black gay man was weaponized against him. I'll circle back again onto that one. He says he was painted as uncollaborative because he was fighting to adapt stories from the original comics, whereas they wanted him to come up with new stuff. He brings up the poor conditions for VFX artists and animation artists, which, okay, yeah, that tracks. He alleges that one of the leads was having a potentially exploitative sexual relationship with a PA. Now, he doesn't say lead what. I don't know if this is a lead actor, a lead animator, or a lead... I have no idea. But he says when he brought it to a producer, it was buried. He alleges that same producer would make jokes about DeMeo's Instagram and the thirst traps that were on there. He brings up this really bizarre thing saying that an artist on the show repeatedly denounced all men as jerks and accused him of, quote-unquote, failing the cause because he kept Cyclops, a man, in charge of the team. That one, even if true, is so incredibly irrelevant because this is a random artist on the team. That's not management. So I don't even know why that's in there. There's some specific citations of generally disparaging remarks or at least inappropriate remarks being made to him, referencing, again, that he's gay in ways that, like, you can't just say that to a person. Now, as I said, this is both specific and vague because he doesn't name anybody. He doesn't even really get very specific in what roles these people were, which results in some of them, like the thing with the artist complaining about Cyclops, being really weird additions. Overall, it just feels more like a general venting session. And given that he claims to have receipts, that he's citing specific incidents but not providing any of those receipts, or even saying what the receipts are, like what are they? Are they email communications? Do you have eyewitnesses? Like he alleges that there's witnesses in other statements, but he isn't clear about what he has witnesses for, what he has some kind of documentation for, what that documentation might be. And I understand that this video itself is not a legal case. He's not required to provide all this stuff. But again, it just strikes me as weird. I don't want to say that what he's saying is unbelievable, given Disney's history. that we know about. And just because Disney's history when it comes, and I can't really speak to any issues of his stance as a black man. I have no business speaking to that. But as a queer person who's been tracking some of Disney's nonsense around queerness, I can at least say that what he's saying, broadly speaking, is not out of the realm of possibility and certainly not particularly unbelievable, given Disney's history of things like canceling the Owl House, reportedly because it was too gay. Recent reports that the makers of Inside Out 2 were told to make characters less gay. Hold on to that one. We're actually going to circle back onto it later. The whole thing with like weird blinking you'll miss it representation that can easily be cut out. So when it goes over to the Chinese market, there's no evidence that it was ever there. Heck, the entire thing of their ties to the Don't Say Gay bill back when Bob Chapek was in charge of the damn thing. So like Disney doesn't have a great track record on queerness in a lot of areas. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but at the same time, this pseudo-vagueness with the most specific stuff having to do with one-on-one incidents that he isn't even always clear if he brought to anyone's attention or not. Sometimes he says that he does, other times he doesn't say. He's been teasing this kinds of stuff for a while, ending tweets with things like more later, more to come. But like at a certain point, you got to put up or shut up. And again, speaking only for his connection to the queer community, because again, I won't speak on his blackness, but speaking as a member of the queer community, if you're going to accuse a company like Disney of disparaging you for your queerness, I would really like to see something tangible behind that. Like, say, for instance, the letter that you claim they sent you saying that that specific post was the reason you were having your credit taken away. Oh, quick side note about that. It's unclear exactly how that's going to work because generally speaking, union rules, you can't just strip somebody's credit like that. What is likely, but at present unconfirmed, is that they're going to have somebody, possibly the new showrunner, do a whole bunch of rewrites on it, enough that they can credit it to somebody other than Beau DeMayo. That's a little bit of conjecture on my part, but just something to keep in mind that may be happening. And if they actually are trying to strip his credit, they probably are going to have to do to at least some capacity. But anyway, coming back to, you make a specific claim about your queerness being core to why this is happening to you. And I really, really want to see some receipts, which you claim to have. And if you are not going to present them yet, I would rather you not say that. And here's why. We are at a point where pretty much any time a queer person points out that they are being harassed, persecuted, or otherwise scapegoated because of their queerness, there is an entire little mini ecosystem of people who, yes, do hate us, but are going to go, you're just complaining. You're just saying that anyone who doesn't like you is homophobic or queerphobic or transphobic. And the thing is, at this point, I'm not saying you have to back up your evidence every time you're going to call somebody that, but if you're going to call a company like Disney that, I really would like you to back it up, because if you don't, it becomes very easy not only to dismiss you and your claims, but it becomes one more piece of evidence on the pile of reasons that they dismiss every time a queer person tries to point this stuff out. Don't add to that pile. So if you're going to bring this up, and if you're going to say you have as much evidence as you have, I would really, really appreciate you sharing it. And if you're not ready to share it yet, then don't say anything yet. That honestly kind of appears to be part of DeMayo's problem. He really seems to want to poke the bear. He's generally the one who keeps dragging this into the public light, which is ironic given that part of his excuse in that OnlyFans video for why he's not producing the specifics, he's not producing eyewitnesses or his receipts yet, is because he, quote, wants to be sure that those responsible are able to receive what I was not, a full and fair investigation away from the public eye. Dude, you're the one who keeps bringing it up in public. They hadn't said a damned thing until you accuse them of stripping your credits because you put up some queer fan art. Like, you can't be the one to drag it in public and then go, I'm going to be better than that, and not drag it into public. Like, dude, what are you doing? Hey, it's me in the edit again. This is another point that he brought up during the live stream. He kind of brought up the idea that he isn't trying to get anybody canceled and he doesn't like cancel culture and that he would really prefer to see this resolved out of the public eye. And like, that's a good enough thing to say, but your actions up to this point don't back that up. It honestly kind of makes me wonder if the conclusion that he is now standing by, that I don't want to have this fight in public, is when he came to a little bit into this, because otherwise it's very difficult for me to square the claims that he was making in public that he's now saying he won't back up because he doesn't want to do it in public. The way I can square that makes the most sense to me is that he realized after having gotten started that he doesn't actually think it's a good idea. And or his attorneys explained to him that that isn't a good idea. I guess this is as good a place as any to say he actually seemed pretty calm and collected on the live stream. He didn't seem like he was venting a lot of anger. He seemed a little bit frustrated and a little tired, but he didn't come across as particularly spiteful, which was kind of a bit more what I was expecting. So that wasn't present for whatever that's worth. The fact that he's trying to act like he's trying to get on a slight moral high horse about it, like, you keep bringing it up, dude, and what's more, you keep sniping at them. Now, granted, he hasn't talked in a whole lot of specifics about his own stuff that's gone on over there since that OnlyFans post, but, like, he'll just piggyback off of stuff. Like, some stuff came up about the status of the Blade movie, what a mess it was, and he throws out what his pitch was so that everyone go, oh, that's a great pitch, they should have done it. Or some word comes out about an earlier version of the script for Doctor Strange 2, which supposedly was much fairer to the character of Wanda than the end version ended up being. And he piggybacks on that like, yeah, I read the original script. It was way fairer to Wanda. And now, with some news coming out of Pixar that they were told, as I mentioned before, to tone down and make some of the characters in Inside Out 2 less gay, he's not like, yeah, less gay was a phrase that I certainly heard when I was over there. Like, dude, stop piggybacking off of these things. Either be public or don't. Hey, it's me again. So to reference the live stream, he did talk about how stories like the Pixar thing coming out made him feel kind of vindicated in the frustrations that he had, because it meant that other people in other areas of Disney were having similar issues to what he claims to have experienced. And I can get that that's vindicating, but I still can't help but think maybe you shouldn't be saying that publicly if part of your stance right now is you don't want this to be a public fight. I don't know, maybe somebody just needs to take Twitter off his phone for a bit. And to be clear, a lot of what he says happened to him specifically in regards to producers and higher-ups that he was butting heads with. I am inclined to believe, because it's his claim that he made his initial pitch for the show to the top brass, including Kevin Feige, but then the actual producer assigned to him kept trying to undermine and make him deliver something that wasn't what he pitched and what isn't what he was trying to make in the first place. And yeah, that kind of thing happens not just at Disney, but in Hollywood all the time. Those kinds of mid-grade producers are generally trying to climb the corporate ladder. So it's really important that they feel like they put their own personal stamp on a thing. And sometimes in the course of trying to do that, they can just run projects aground. Where I tell my head is where he continues to claim that Disney is simply smearing him and all of the other stuff is made up, you know, with the vague allusions to egregious actions. But I don't know, I guess I just have a harder time buying the defense being, oh, it is completely made up when you are not providing the evidence of that. And again, maybe it'll show up in court. Although, let me say for the record right now, if this gets settled out of court and we never find out what actually happened, that's legitimately a problem. Because if what he says is going on is what was going on, then people should be held to account. People should be removed from positions. And yes, I understand the problems are largely systemic, and I'm not making a bad apples argument. But like, if people there are problems, and he made a claim on the live stream that he feels it's important that he say stuff because otherwise he feels responsible for what happens later, but like, if you're not providing the evidence and naming the names, how are you actually affecting any change? Again, I'm inclined to think that this weird tightrope walk that he's currently doing is probably on the advice of legal counsel, who cares more about getting him a good outcome in court than changing the corporate structure at Disney. I don't know, this turned into a longer insert than I meant it to. All right, back to whatever the heck I was talking about before. And I really think it's only lawyers holding him back, because as a practical matter, it's not like there's a bridge left to burn, at least in terms of Disney. And that's part of what's so weird about this. Because now that we've covered the timeline, let's talk about how odd this entire thing is. Because generally, as a rule, when somebody starts going, oh, this company's mistreating me, that corporation, especially in the entertainment industry, will come forward plainly, this is why we did that, and let that speak for itself. Now, It is worth noting that with Disney specifically, they might have some reason to be a little bit more hesitant than others, that being James Gunn. Quick reminder on there, James Gunn was fired while he was working early on in the making of Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3 because of some old tweets getting dredged up from years and years ago and causing an astroturfed fake online outrage, and Disney said, you're fired. Those were inappropriate jokes. But here's the thing about that. Firstly, that was where Disney ended up with egg on their face pretty much immediately, because people were very quick to point out these are real old. He's talked about them before. He's apologized for them before. And the people who dredged them up just hate his politics because he said mean things about Trump. It was very obviously a fake outrage campaign, and Disney looked really bad really quickly, which is why they would eventually bring James Gunn back to make Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3. But beyond that, there's another interesting thing about the James Gunn situation, which is worth pointing out, especially compared to Beau DeMayo. And this is part of why, dude, if I have any advice for you, shut up. Stop tweeting. Because the smartest thing James Gunn did was not complain. He knew it was unfair. I have no doubt he knew it was BS. But he just kind of shrugged and went, well, that's what they decided to do, and moved on and went and did other stuff. And that speaks very well of him as a professional. Because regardless of the legitimacy of why he was fired, and again, it was a pretty illegitimate reason, just going oh, okay, and moving on to the next job speaks well of you within the industry. Complaining and bitching about your firing, that doesn't go over so well. That puts you on the trajectory of someone like Gina Carano, who has had to scrape by getting work from the Daily Wire because she burned her bridge with Disney so thoroughly. And again, it's worth reiterating with her, while some people will now conflate the idea of it was her specific political views, sort of, not really. The real reason that she was let go was because she wouldn't stop. Yes, her views were controversial, and I don't doubt that last one, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, was probably a pretty heavily weighted straw. But at the same time, ultimately what got her canned was the fact that she'd already been sat down and talked to by both her bosses at Disney and her management, telling her, we need you to stop because you keep generating headlines, and because you are most famous for being in The Mandalorian, the headline is always Star Wars star controversy, and we need you to stop. And after being told that, she kept doing it. And that, more than the specifics of her opinions, is why she was not only fired and dropped by her representation and management, but why she has not been able to get work in the mainstream industry again, because she showed she won't listen. And Beau DeMayo is coming dangerously close to pulling the same kind of dumb move. Regardless of what you think with Disney, and at this point, Disney wasn't going to take you back regardless of the specifics of the original reason you were fired. They were never going to take you back. But you probably could have moved on to somewhere else, especially off the back of success of something like X-Men 97, which again, credit to the man, is really good. Not exclusively because of him, but obviously he's a pretty sizable part of it. You should have lined up your next piece of work, is what I'm saying. Because right now, if people know your name, it's not tied to your work, it's tied to the controversy. And that's not gonna help. Hey, it's me again from the edit. This should be the last one. Another thing he addressed on the live stream was that he actually has been doing work, but he can't talk about it. And no, that's not I have a girlfriend who lives in Canada, you'll just never meet her thing. It's pretty legit because he's doing writing work on a video game. And if you know anything about the pipeline for video games, the writing is done very early in the process, and then the writers don't get to talk about it until the project is announced, because unlike movies, most video games get done in secret for a big chunk of their development. There's going to be a lengthy stretch of time where the thing's going to be worked on but has not been announced publicly yet. And until it is, anyone who has worked on it can't talk about it. If you want a recent example of that, Steph Sterling has only recently been able to talk about the fact that she did writing for an upcoming game called Date Everything. Now, the writing, they did that 2 years ago, but that's how long video game development takes, and the game wasn't announced, and she couldn't talk about it until it was. So it is good for Beau DeMayo that he is clearly working again. it's a little bit of a trouble for his career that he can't really be clear about what he's working on, but it is a good thing for him that he lines something else up. Maybe next dude, try and line something up that you're allowed to talk about so that you can, have a different subject on your social media. Or, stay off social media. Crazy notion. I've heard that people do it. Not that I would know. All right, back to it. But again, it's very strange because neither side is showing their hand. And again, at least in the case of Beau DeMayo, I suspect that's because his lawyers are telling him, frickin' stop. And he is kind of stopping, but not fully. But the fact that both are alluding to the idea of like, oh, they weaponized my queerness against me. Oh, he did some real egregious stuff. Then they're both just kind of, again, it's like they're both bluffing, waiting for the other to stop. You know what it's like? I was tempted to say it's like a slow motion car crash. That's wrong though, because a slow motion car crash still implies that it happened at a normal speed, but it's slow motion on the replay. This isn't even that. You know what this is? Have you ever had to merge onto an on-ramp, like onto the highway? And it starts out as a 2-lane and narrows down to a 1-lane as it merges. And so you have all these sets of cars and they need to, it's like a zipper. One, the other, one, the other. So each needs to give way for the other, then they go next. And that's how you properly merge. Connecticut drivers. I don't know why Connecticut drivers suck at that so badly, but they really, really do. Sorry, that's a bit of a personal beef. Moving on. Anyways, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a traffic jam at a merger point as 2 lanes are merging into one and there's 2 cars that just aren't giving way. And I'm just watching as they very, very slowly at like 1 or 2 miles per hour run into each other. This is the most avoidable, unnecessary thing in the world, but I'm just slowly watching them inch closer and closer, neither committing to just sideswiping the other, but just like neither side's backing down. They're really? And like the crash hasn't happened yet, but I'm kind of sick of waiting for it because the fact that it's taking this long to happen is the really weird thing. Again, Disney being at least initially hesitant strikes me as making a little bit of sense based off their history with somebody like James Gunn. But at the same time, if you've got something tangible, it's weird that you're being vague with it. I'm not going to say that this is the case, but it feels like both sides have something to be embarrassed about. What it feels like is like maybe DeMayo had a little bit of inappropriateness on the site, on the job. And maybe Disney like has an illegal non-disparagement clause, or maybe Disney tried to silence him over, just some positive queer tweets or whatever, and they know that's a bad look. It feels like both sides have something to lose by the truth coming out. And I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it sounds like both sides have a reason to be embarrassed. Maybe Disney is embarrassed because of the way that DeMayo was treated by executives, higher ups, things that he was told and that there are witnesses for. But also maybe DeMayo actually does have stuff that he did that he deserved to get fired over. It feels like both sides are pulling this escalating bluff because neither of them really wants to have to show their hand. They're hoping the other guy's gonna fold and he's not. And the cars just inch closer and closer and closer. Neither side backing off, but neither side actually committing to what they're doing either. This is one of the weirder things that I've covered in terms of this kind of industry nonsense. Again, just for how long, drawn out, and non-committal both halves have been. I expect eventually, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either somebody's going to finally show their hand, which will probably encourage the other side to just come out and say whatever it is they aren't saying. Or this is going to get quietly settled in an out-of-court settlement with a revised termination agreement that allows him to keep his credit, but also he'll actually shut up this time. It's one of those 2 things. And I'm done waiting to find out which. Because especially if it's the latter, that's incredibly anticlimactic, especially when just the weirdness of it already, I think is worth talking about. Just trying to figure out what is going on. I had to get all that off my chest because, again, it's just strange. These things are normally so straightforward and happen really quickly. This is loosey-goosey roundabout and has been dragging on for months. It's weird. What do you think about this? Again, I'd ask you to please avoid weaving conspiracy theories about either party involved in this. It's exhausting and I find it unhelpful at best. But whatever your thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like and share and subscribe. All those help me out as well. Don't worry too much about it, though. There's links to other things I do down in the description. You will not find a link to my OnlyFans in the description, but, Vera Wild, it's out there. You can find it on your own. Come on now. But regardless of any of that, what I really want you to remember is that no matter what you think of this nonsense, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melinda Pedersen, Tarak, the thing that goes joint in the anime, Gene Foray, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Frenobulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperel, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam R. D.L. Taylor, Palba Rabajoggle, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you're wondering about this little guy, this is Nymph. He's new. Don't worry, the other two are fine. He's just not fully socialized with them yet. You'll see them all together soon. Won't they? I say, well.